I'm going to participate in the panel. And,
Are you Lisa?
I'm Lauren.
Hi, Lauren. Oh, of
Yes,
course.
Senator Congress. Hi, I'm Lisa.
Yes, how are you? Nice to see you. Yeah, Bill Green. Okay. What we're going to do is talk about firearm legislation. And Dave, I'm going to need you, Dave.
okay.
Because you've got a list here of all the firearm legislation that's in the legislature, which is where legislation goes right now.
There's 4 bills there. You turn it over, and there's 4 more on the back.
You want,
When we actually have the panel discussion, I'm going to want to participate because I did work with all of these folks on many of these bills, and I may be able to add some information. There are a number of bills that are coming, and I believe that many of them, many of them have been in front of the legislature before. There's going to be a big push to pass more gun control legislation. But what most people don't know is that there have been a number of very strong policies passed, and the people here know that because they were involved in all the negotiations and passing that legislation. Senator DeChambeau, you were a pleasure to work with. She sponsored the safe storage legislation. As you learned, it's not just about safe storage. It's complex, sophisticated legislation that is interconnected with federal programs. Senator Kime, probably the toughest bill I've ever worked on. Took a lot of bruises from it, was the so-called yellow flag law. Anytime you're dealing with a person's constitutional freedoms and due process, it's complex. She is now the assistant Republican leader in the Senate and an amazing legislator, a very powerful force in the Republican caucus. She was instrumental in negotiating that package, and as you learned earlier from Commissioner Soschuk, that's another complex policy that really balances constitutional freedoms with our court system. So, and then Senator Harrington, incredibly knowledgeable on these matters, and he's going to be talking a little bit about some of these policies that will be proposed. Lauren, who's been a pleasure to work with, she's also very knowledgeable, works with the NRA, and I believe there's an NRA lobbyist possibly here. Is he still here?
He'll be here shortly.
Okay, so he can join the panel. We have a new lobbyist here in the state, and he'll join the panel. Well, this is the part. I think.
want to do one by one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
If we could just listen, just read the titles,
okay.
and then we can get started. Answer any questions from the panel on the past laws that have been proposed and passed, and then we'll get to some of the ones that are coming up, and just have a roundtable discussion about those.
LD 22 is an act to impede the transfer of firearms to prohibited persons. Who wants to talk first?
Well, let's read them all.
Read them all.
Okay.
23, an act to allow certain school employees to carry firearms on school property. Number 60, LD 60, an act to require a 72-hour waiting period after the sale of a firearm. LD 168, an act regarding criminal background checks for sale, transfer, or exchange of firearms. LD 271, an act requiring the University of Maine system and the Maine Community College system to offer a for credit, that's not for credit, but for credit, course on hunting, fishing, recreational shooting, and trapping. LD 493 is an act to establish a statewide relinquished firearms inventory. LD 551 is an act to strengthen Maine citizens' Second Amendment rights by allowing the discharge of firearms on private property that is within 500 feet of school property in certain circumstances. LD 582, an act to enhance certain penalties for possession of firearms by prohibited persons. LD 624, an act to prohibit government officials from maintaining records, to prohibit them from maintaining records related to firearms ownership. LD 629, an act to protect and defend the individual's civil right to bear arms through exemption of firearms and ammunition from taxation. And LD 674, an act to allow bail commissioners to carry firearms in correctional facilities and jails. So do you want to go one at a time?
Sure. We've got one more thing to do before we start with that debate. Senator DeChambeau does have a list.
Right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Senator DeChambeau does have a list of legislation that the legislature has passed related to the subject. And I believe you wanted to give a little bit of a presentation on what the committee did. And can you just reference which committee you served on and you can give that presentation? We'll get back to these.
I think I have to go up to the mic, okay?
Do you think she
Can
wants
you
to go
hear
up to the
me? You
mic?
can?
Okay.
Okay. I want to introduce myself. I am a retired state employee. I worked for 5 decades with the Department of Corrections, mostly at Maine Correctional Center. Some of you may have been at the Sportsman's Banquet where I spoke and told you I'm from Benefit, and even though I've been a police commissioner, I've never touched a gun. But I'm glad there were a few Republican legislators there who told you I'm okay. I'm not taking your gun away, and Second Amendment. What I wanted to share with you, though, is I was Senate Chair of Criminal Justice Public Safety for 2 sessions. One of them was with me, and I served with you and state and local. So, the 129th, all the bills having to do with firearms goes to the Committee on Criminal Justice Public Safety. In session 129th, and that is from, I think, 2019, 2020, we had 10 bills, firearm bills. Those of you who do attend, we call them Gun Day. We have, because there are so many people that show up, and I'm telling you about 150, 250 people show up when we have bills on guns. It's much better to do it all in one day than have you keep coming back and what have you. In the 129th, we had 10. On the 130th, we had 12. I did this little exercise because I surprised myself. 22 bills in 4 years, and we only passed 5. And I'm saying that because some of these bills that are being proposed this year might scare some of you. But the system works. In 130th, we had 12 bills. There were many that never made it to the floor because the bills lacked so much give and take that they were voted unanimously in committee on not to pass. So that they're dead. They never go forward. Those that passed, the only unanimous one that passed was the safe storage bill. And I'll tell you why. There were other bills having to do with firearms. If someone uses a gun, or if a child finds a gun in Grampy's bedroom and uses it, there were laws to make that unlawful and therefore a Class D crime or a Class E crime because Grampy didn't put the gun away. Those kinds of bills never made it to the floor because we felt that's so punitive. You're either going to pay a civil fine up to $1,000 or you're going to go to jail. And so that's why the safe storage bill, the onus was on you. If we got the grant and the money and with Corey's bill about being exempt from paying taxes, that is progressive. That puts the onus on you to make your home safe. It isn't that if you fail to do so, we're going to come up with handcuffs on you. So those bills do not pass, and some of them might be close to that again. They keep coming back. So I just wanted to share that with you. Everybody's afraid. I know when I am faced with 200 people who, many of them, and it's just not Sportsmen's Alliance or people who don't even subscribe to the SAM, but those who just want to talk to you about the Second Amendment over and over and over again. It's not just that. There are others, Moms Against Gun Violence, they come. And I remember the last time there was a hearing, you know, where we go about 12 hours straight listening and voting on this. I realized, and I said it, you people aren't too far apart. Just the lingo was different. So to make fun of Mothers Against Gun Violence or to hate the people who say Second Amendment, that doesn't work after a while, and it doesn't. And you don't come to some understanding. Thank goodness we had a very, I guess, conservative committee that only 5 bills passed in 2 years. So, but they were good bills. They weren't punitive. So I just wanted to share that with you. Something I want to touch on that Commissioner Sawchuk mentioned about firearm safety. Working for the Department of Corrections, I read the crime report books that come out every year that tells you how many rapes there have occurred, how many robberies occurred in the whole system. For some reason, last year I read death by firearms, and I saw the number was something like 160. And I was gonna call I called the commissioner, I said, that's a mistake. We had 44 homicides last year. And he goes, Susan, the rest were suicides. And that hit me. It wasn't killing somebody in manslaughter or what have you. It was suicides, the use of gun. And I've heard from other state police, and think about your state police officers up in Worcester County, they've come across in the smaller counties. So that was something, I don't know if we'll ever stop it, but that was one step we wanted to do with safe homes.
Well, it brings us to yellow flags. Does anybody have any questions about yellow flags or want to start the discussion with a question about yellow flag amendments? Lisa, how you doing over there? Okay, anything you want to say?
Well, I mean, if people don't have questions about yellow flag, I mean, it has been in law for a while now.
Yep.
And really looking to make sure that we have the proper people to make the assessment. The mental health assessment has been the holdup there, but other than that, I think it's, you know, if there's questions, happy to talk about it, but yeah.
Well, I have a question, Matt. Is it the responsibility of the legislature, this is a very difficult thing to ask, but to prevent suicides? Can suicides be prevented? How much of the onus when we have a tragedy like that is on the legislature in various parts of state and municipal governments?
So, I mean, I would just say, I think we have a responsibility to provide proper access to mental health and substance abuse treatment, which is usually the underlying issue that results in those unfortunate incidents. Unfortunately, a lot of times I feel like they go for the tool that was used rather than cause of what got the person there. And I think constantly feel like that's the focus that we need to be putting our attention, time, and energy towards.
I just want to add something for Senator Conlon. You weren't here earlier when Commissioner Sawchuk presented the 36 individual cases in which yellow flag has been used. And I encourage you to take the document he supplied and make sure you get it, because it was amazing. It really looks like yellow flag was used appropriately and in the right situations. And for those that are listening, when you're negotiating something as controversial as Second Amendment rights, you can get the snot kicked out of you. Let me just be frank. And you take a tremendous beating politically because people are afraid that they're losing their rights or that you're taking them away. Somebody's got to be responsible for the policies that save lives and to thread a needle with constitutional freedoms. I know the beating that I took, and it was almost a relief to know that the program is working the way we had wanted it to. So I encourage you to get that document, because it's hard when you're in an elected office and you're the tip of the spear to be out there. And so I just thought I'd encourage you to get that, because
You know,
it's
thank you.
important.
Yeah, definitely, there was a lot of people angry with me about the bill as we were discussing it, but, you know, I think really to Matt's point, that when people, the danger really is what's the impetus behind someone being unsafe either with themselves or with others, and it's a mental health crisis. So it's not the tool that they're using. So that, the yellow flag law really doesn't even, the focus isn't guns, the focus is mental health crisis. So I'm glad to know that it's working, because yeah, there's been a hold up with just getting people, right, the physicians there to do the assessment.
Can I ask questions, David?
Of course
Let's
you
start with
can.
number
That's your job.
22. An act would be the transfer of firearms to prohibited persons. Who would those prohibited persons be, and how would the act work? And after a bill comes to you on the first day, and one aside, when Channel 6 shows up and starts asking questions about a bill that's been introduced that's never going to get to the floor, do you ever get to say, this ain't going to happen, don't worry about it? Or do we make too much news from bills that are, do we make too much news over those 17 bills that are never going to get passed? But anyway, who will this bill prohibit from receiving a firearm? How will the transfer become more legal?
I think Lauren, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. So this bill, I have not done the full analysis, but my understanding of this bill, it basically takes federal law and codifies it as state law. So under federal law, we have what we call straw purchases. I cannot go into a firearms dealer, purchase a firearm for someone that I know is prohibited, and then turn that firearm over. That's already illegal. This bill is sort of a copycat of that law. It's duplicative. I mean, federal law already deals with straw purchases, but this is a proposal to basically codify what the federal law does.
Is it necessary?
No, not in my.
Why don't we, are we doing a good job of enforcing that federal law? I'm just shooting from the hip here, but I mean, just wondering.
I would say that I think, I think enforcement of existing gun laws is something that our society as a whole could work on. I think oftentimes you see gun charges dropped as the first charges while you're negotiating whatever is going to happen. Usually, you know, there's an array of charges, and the gun charge gets overlooked. So I would say that prosecution of those who break existing law probably could be beefed up, in my opinion.
An act to allow certain school employees to carry firearms on school property. I think of my sweet old granny English teacher, Mrs. Peaks, who loved poetry and literature, you know, with a 45 strapped on her hip in case there's trouble. Who would we be allowing? Any qualified, say, educator who wanted to take training to carry a firearm on the high school campus? Who are we talking? Who are they? Do you know who we're aiming this at?
I think it's aimed at I think you'd have to obtain prior approval from the school board and the superintendent, and I think it's important to note that the proposal does not mandate anyone who's uncomfortable carrying a firearm on school property. I think it gives those who would want to get the requisite training the opportunity with approval from school administrators and school boards, should they.
So is that illegal now? Is it illegal for the math teacher to have a gun?
Yes.
So this would legalize that, but there'd be a lot of, yes.
If I can add, I co-sponsored that
Yep.
legislation. So that legislation specifically was brought forward to Representative Foster by an actual school administrator.
Yep.
But the goal of the legislation is we have a shortage of school resource officers right now. I know the department I work for, we don't have a school resource officer. We can't even fill our regular roster, let alone set us, and the school right now is paying for a school resource officer that we don't have. And what this bill would allow is the, either, depending on what the school board, the local community decided to do. I'm sorry?
It says right there. I have a copy of it.
Yeah.
Who is allowed?
Yeah, it would allow them to hire people that would be qualified, trained under standards that are set by the Maine Criminal Justice Academy to fill in slots for that missing school resource officer.
Yep.
And that could include existing employees or new employees.
I think unfortunately what's gonna happen to these guys, because I've been on the side of these types of bills before, is what's gonna happen is they're not gonna talk about any of that, the opposition to a bill like this. What they're gonna say is somebody like Representative Perkins here wants to allow guns in schools, right? And they're not gonna finish off with any of that, and then they'll take out some nasty ads, and, you know, the Press Herald will turn around and they'll read a nasty or write a nasty op-ed, and they won't actually explain the law, just say that these individuals, you included Mr. Henry, Senator Harrington, there want to make sure that guns are allowed in schools. Unfortunately, where our politics is not.
I should, if I can add that.
Absolutely.
There are other states that do this, and there are other states that have been doing this for years. I mean, this is not a new concept. It would be new to Maine and fast.
How's it,
New concept.
I'm sorry?
I was saying that argument doesn't fly in a committee that other states.
Well, not to disagree with you, but we hear it all the time in committee when, you know, certain other members of the legislature bring forward bills to us all the time and say, well, they do it in other states, let's do it here in Maine, and we see this constantly. You know, we're setting our emission standards because of what other states are doing. I constantly hear it all day, this is what other states are doing. You know, how do we handle criminal justice, because this is what other states are doing. And, you know, unfortunately, things get passed because of what other states are doing. So I understand what you're saying, and with all due respect, but we hear it all the time on one side, so, you know, it lies on their side.
Let's get back to the idea though. I think everyone is trying to make our schools safe so that there isn't a tragedy. And for me, I think it starts with, you don't let them in the door into a school. It has to start with that. And that's the beginning of the School Safety Center. When that was created, Representative Corey, working with us, was to ensure that we had safe barriers in our schools. We had to start with that. The debate that we're having around firearms in schools, whether it's a resource officer or it's another name, what people I think are trying to do, everyone on both sides, is to make sure this tragedy never happens. It's how do you get past what Senator DeChambeau was just referencing, the initial talking points of both sides that have been going on for 15 or 20 years. How do you get past that to how do we all work together to get to that goal of never having a shooting in Maine? And so that's where I think we have to start the debate. Reject both sides' extreme arguments and say something along the lines of we all want the same thing, safe schools, never another tragedy. That should be the goal of everyone. I think what we have a tendency to do on the Second Amendment side too is to use same talking points. Every one of us wants to protect children. And I think if you approach it that way, what can we do? The resource officer label, if you had put that bill in and said, an act to expand access to resource officers, how different would the debate be?
Or to allow teachers to become
Resource officers. So that should be really, I think the foundation of the debate is, like you said, reject all the talking points on both sides that are extreme and get to the very goal, which is to save children's lives.
Do you think it matters that a shooter doesn't know where would it matter if the shooter didn't know where the guns were in a school?
Absolutely.
You think so?
Absolutely. As someone teaches first responding shooting classes, that is absolutely a factor that.
So you would support the bill for that reason?
100%, and I will offer free training to any teacher who wants it.
Go ahead, Matt.
Real quick, you know, in my real world capacity, I've been a police officer for 15 years, and, you know, laws go so far, like when the janitor every day goes outside for a smoke break at 10:15 and props that door open. You know, the laws can go so far that, you know, we can't even convince janitors to close a door behind them. And just basic things like that we're not enforcing, that I think random audits by somebody would be highly effective. You know, if they're, you know, if school districts were fined, hypothetically, I thought that we should, you know, if we sent auditors around to find open doors, things like that, and their school funding was tied to violations, you'd see how quickly the schools were hardened, and at least access to the building would be limited.
I think that might help, but, I mean, you and I both want to use
there is a technology component to this debate as well. The Maine School Safety Center has access to research from all over the country. That very door you're talking about should have a sensor on it. Every evaluation, every school should identify the weaknesses in that school, potential weaknesses of that being one of them. Why there's not a sensor on that door that goes off after 20 seconds is just beyond me. They're cheap, you've got cameras, you've got ways to design schools so that a shooter can't even get close and they're identified. I mean, there's so many different components to this that could be researched.
If that door locked automatically,
Yeah.
and the janitor had a key card and swipe to get back in, then it would never have to be open in the first place.
It's a perfect example
A lot of things
of
would be
what it could be.
Susan, back to the Mrs. Peaks with a gun. Would you be opposed to that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yep, I just wanted to have somebody on the other side saying,
Well,
saying, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea at all, because teachers sometimes go crazy in things.
Yeah.
You know?
I have a friend who's the superintendent of schools, and they discuss this all the time, and he talks about making schools safe. There was a bill similar to this, I think, last year or the year before, and I had to be educated, and I do listen to all 200, and I think it was Troy Jackson put in the bill, because someone up in Aroostook County, he brings his son to school, and he has his pickup truck, and he's going out hunting afterwards, and it's in the back, and it's loaded, and he's just dropping off his kid, and he got in trouble.
It better not be loaded.
And I'm thinking, that would never happen in Bedford. I mean, it's just, there's the difference, and I said this once with Susan Collins at the Sportsman's Alliance banquet, and I spoke about, you know, there are cities we don't do that. It's not that it's bad or it's good, it's just that, and for me to hear that someone's dropping off a child, and I accepted it. I said, geez, someone had to tell me for me to know that, you know? So I do see that, and I do understand that, but you're right, don't have it loaded. But
That's the one we got popped on though. That's the one where the anti-gunners really came after me. Like John Martin came to me to sign a bill that basically made it so if you had an unloaded in a locked gun, you know, in a safe in your car, you could drop your kids off at school, which was part of the Safe Gun Zones Act of 1993, which was actually Joe Biden's law. It was an exception in that law. And you would have thought, you know what I mean, we were talking about allowing people to carry loaded guns in school and everything else. And it was funny because, you know, like as a, you know, I think I was probably in my, you know, second term as a legislator or something like that. And I remember like going through this whole thing and, you know, John and I were trying to explain why we had signed this bill and how it really wasn't a big deal and everything else. And somebody wrote in the comment section in the Press Herald that both John Martin and I would both be kicked out of office. And I said to myself, I'm like, I finally made it. Like somebody wants the same action for me as they want for John, you know, Martin. But it's just, this stuff becomes so irrational, you know, sometimes that it's hard to even have a public, you know, debate about it or a public conversation.
So I want to throw something out because you, hold on a second, because you segued into it. Rural and urban are continuing to divide and become more extreme. And I think the inability to listen to each side is causing a lot of problems. But not just that issue, but also when it comes to resources. When you talk about resources, go visit a Portland school and take a look at their curriculum and what they have in their school versus a school in Allagash. It's night and day. When it comes, and why I'm bringing this up, because there are policy makers who are listening, is that there is a serious inequality in the distribution of resources when it comes to school security. If you live in rural Maine, you're getting pennies on the dollars. If you live in an urban area, then you have serious resources and a tax base to support your schools. I think one of the first things that could be done is to assess the inequalities between urban and rural school districts when it relates to security. And you would realize that really we need to spend a lot of resources securing our schools, not just for firearms, but for other things too. Connections to mental health services. In the workings of the yellow flag law, when we were doing the telemedicine component, those same hospitals who were pushing back were bragging that they now had access to mental health services through Spurwink. And I said, well, does that serve all of Maine or just the urban areas? And this is what it looked like. They went, well, just the urban areas. That's not acceptable. That's the point, is that we need to bring equitable resources across the state. And I wanted to make
I've
that
often
point.
thought, we have AFS and we get a kid that comes from Sweden.
Yeah.
I think, I'm serious about this, we gotta send kids from, like, I'm in Cumberland, so I'll make fun of Greeley. We gotta send kids from Greeley to, to Wisdom, and kids from Wisdom to Greeley. And have a 3 months exchange there where you can go home on weekends or something, but learn a little bit more about, your state and what other kids are like. And by the way, that funded, unfilled position, tell the superintendent, I want the money split up among all the taxpayers in town and returned to them, okay? Just kidding.
There we go, Bill Green.
Thank you very much, I'll be No, but that's, I don't go start about school bus, but it seems to me that funded, unfilled positions are little cash drawers filled with money that superintendents can go to when they need a little extra. Sorry about that. Okay, an act to require, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Lisa,
I,
Susan.
just listening, I shouldn't have responded saying I wouldn't vote for this, right? Should not have said that. I think what we all need to know, or those of you who aren't in the legislature, that bill will come before for a hearing where they present it, and we may ask a few questions or have problems with it. Then they come back 2 weeks later for a work session, and that's when we vote for it. In that interim, if you are a good legislator, you're listening to what the committee is saying, and if they don't like something, then you gotta go back to the drawing board and see if you can tweak the bill and the language, because it looks like it's gonna die unless I take this out or put this in. That's up to you. That's when a real hardworking legislator will probably go to the chief law enforcement officer and talk about it, see if it works, and especially with bills having to do with firearms, or any bill, I should say. There's an organization, has nothing to do with the Senate, but it's a CLAC. You've heard of CLAC. Criminal Law Advisory Commission. It's judges, sitting judges, it's prosecutors, it's defense attorney, it's attorney general's office. Because of my position as chair, and so did the House chair, we're members and we go. They look at the 1,800 bills that are gonna be out by the end of the year.
Nationally in all the state legislatures?
No, that's just Maine. There's
Okay.
1,800 bills in the
Oh, but
session.
they're not gun bills, 1,800
No.
bills? Okay, I'm
And
sorry.
they will look at the ones that go, this is problematic. And they will debate it, and it's amazing to hear the judge saying, they bring out case law and everything. If you learn from that and change your bill, that's good. Because they will come and testify against the bill if they don't, if